Back in late February, just days before Russia launched its attack on Ukraine, Turkish officials warned that sanctions against Moscow would be counterproductive. Now, more than 6 months into the conflict, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan repeated those words with a stern assessment for the West and the current energy crunch it finds itself in.
Tabii Avrupa aslında ektiğini biçiyor.
Europe is actually reaping what it sowed. Of course, Europe's attitude towards Mr. Putin, implementing sanctions, led Putin to the point of, if you're doing this, then I will do this against them. And Putin is using all his means and weapons, and the most important of these is natural gas.
President Erdogan, who was on a three-nation tour of the Balkans, warned the West not to underestimate Russia. He also stressed the importance of Turkey's balanced position of keeping channels open to both Moscow and Kiev. Turkey has played a key mediating role in the conflict. Last month, Ankara brokered a deal that allowed Ukrainian grain exports to resume after being stalled for months. So has Europe's sanctions strategy against Russia backfired? And are sanctions sustainable amid growing protests against energy prices? And to discuss if cracks are emerging in the EU's sanctions against Russia, joining me is Paul Ingram from London. He's a senior research associate at Cambridge University's Centre for the Study of Existential Risk. And Zaur Gasimov, he's a senior research fellow at the University of Bonn. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So, Paul, at a press conference with his Serbian counterpart this week, President Erdogan has said the West's attitude towards Russia was not right. Could you put that into context, and what was he hinting at?
So I think he's having to make quite a tight balancing act between his relationship with Russia that has so much dependency on economic and trade dimensions and his Western allies. He's also looking for ways to mediate this crisis because I think he's basically making the observation that the West is being very closed in its approach, entirely supporting a Ukrainian military victory rather than looking for mediating options.
So, Zaur, Paul just mentioned this delicate balancing act between Russia and the West that Turkey has undertaken. But President Erdogan has also given credit to current Russian policies, accusing the West of provoking Moscow. How is that going to impact this delicate balancing act? And do you think Turkey is siding now more with Russia?
I wouldn't put that in a way, maybe. I would rather contextualize it as a balancing and changing vulnerabilities into diplomatic advantages or assets. It's a very tough interaction. And I guess it's not about siding on one side or another. I mean, Turkey promoted the idea of territorial integrity of Ukraine and was ready to sell weaponry to Ukraine and condemned both the occupation of the Crimea and also what happened on the 24th of February. But in the same time, it maintained dialogue with Russia.
Yes.
And I mean, I wouldn't put it into the context of siding, but much more of intermediation.
So, Paul, we all know that an energy crisis is looming over Europe, and nations are taking drastic measures to brace for this winter. Do you think, is there some sort of a regret that they had swiftly joined the U.S. sanctions against Russia? Was there a miscalculation on their side when it comes to imposing crushing sanctions on Russia?
I don't see any evidence to suggest that there's regrets yet. The political classes across Europe remain solid in their support for isolation of Russia. I think that's unfortunate, not simply because of the economic impact and the price of fuel, but also because we do need to be maintaining a bridge to Russia and finding ways of negotiating ourselves out of this current war. And I think in many respects, Turkey is in attempting this balancing act and maintaining relationships with both sides, playing an important role.
But we have already seen protests breaking out in places like Germany and Czechia, Zaur. And during his meeting with President Erdogan, Serbian President Vučić said that Serbia had asked Turkey to allow to transfer electricity imports from Azerbaijan. So have European countries started acting on their own when it comes to securing their energy needs?
I think the energy needs are so significant that it is inevitable that there will be some cracks. But I think that we're going to have some weeks or months before these cracks turn into anything significant when it comes to accepting Russian gas. I think the politics is too strongly aligned against Russia at the moment within most of these countries.
So, Zaur, are sanctions on Russia working? And do you believe that the European Union will maintain its united front against Russia as winter nears?
I'm a bit more pessimistic than Paul with this regard. We have seen and witnessed demonstrations in Prague, in the capital of Czech Republic, with 70,000 people protesting on the streets against the government's policy towards Ukrainian crisis. And in the same time, I mean, we had a quite warm summer in Western Europe, but the things change now. And in autumn, the mood of population can change with regard to the economic crisis of inflation and etc. I mean, we shouldn't forget that we have like 2 years of pandemic behind us, and I guess that makes the position of Turkey as an important transit country for gas from Azerbaijan and also a country having gas assets also in Mediterranean, even much more significant for European partners.
So, Paul, another crucial issue is the grain exports unblocked from Ukrainian and Russian ports late last month. But Russian President Putin has recently said the developing world had been cheated by the deal, that grain exports were not going to the world's poorest countries as originally intended. So what's your take on that? And could Russia walk out of this deal if pressured more?
So Russia can always walk out of these deals, but I don't think that it will be because of where the grains are going. I think it has more to do with what is going on the ground within Ukraine and the way in which the grain exports, like the crisis around the Zaporizhzhia plant, is being used by both sides as a way to discredit the other side and to gain some diplomatic leverage.
So, Zaur, what happens if this deal is broken? Could Western sanctions on Russian grain and fertilizers be lifted so as to appease Russia, or they will press ahead with imposing an oil price cap on Russia?
I would think that at the current moment, I can't imagine that the sanctions would strike the grain or something, some other field which is connected to agriculture. And the reason for that is the very strong will not to jeopardize the menaced situation with nutrition, with grain exports to the African continent and to the Middle East. And the European and the entire Western world is very interested in stable and sustainable exports of grain to those parts of the world really faced with a huge humanitarian disaster and problem. And that makes also the position of Ankara as a broker and intermediator, both with Ukraine and with Russia, so important. The aggravation of the situation with the grain exports to African continent and to the Middle East would mean the new wave of refugees from those regions to the European Union. Mm-hmm. And that played a crucial role in the attempt also of European Union to continue the dialogue.
Okay,
with Ankara.
Yeah, so Paul, on the other hand, Turkey has also said that it could play a facilitating role on Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. What's at stake for Ankara, and how risky is the situation now?
So I think the situation in the nuclear power plant is very tense and has a significant risk locally in that part of Ukraine. The IAEA inspectors are now in, but they are reporting that we're still seeing military action. Shells are raining down around that part. And I think we're seeing accusations pointed at both sides. And the reason for that is because this power plant is being used both by the Russians and by the Ukrainians for their military purposes and propaganda. And that means that it's actually going to be extremely difficult to be negotiating any sort of arrangement around the power plant, because both sides are actually gaining quite a bit from the process at the moment.
That brings a question to mind, Zaur. How is grain diplomacy different from the nuclear power plant diplomacy?
I would say that none of the aspects is much or less important. I would put them on the same level. And of course, what happens around Zaporizhzhia has an importance for the entire world, but the same goes also for the grain diplomacy. It plays a crucial role, and and Europeans are aware of that, and that makes the situation so multidimensional. And we see how the crisis in Ukraine touches many other regions of the world. And in grain diplomacy, maybe it couldn't be foreseen at the very start of the large-scale Russian invasion into Ukraine in February, but now we see what kind of aftermath it could have for the huge regions like Africa and Middle East. So that is, I would even put at the moment in autumn, having in mind that winter months would come, that the grain diplomacy is of paramount importance.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.